I never meant to raise children that weren't mine. But when I met David, he came with two shadows at his side, Emma and Jake, small, uncertain, and always watching. Emma was 6 and already too careful with her words. Jake was 4, and his laughter came out like it had to climb out of something heavy. They clung to him, but he didn't know how to hold them. I was 24, a dental hygienist by trade, floating paycheck to paycheck in a studio with creaking windows and a second-hand sofa that barely folded out. But I had energy, hope, and some kind of cracked faith in people. And David had that messy charisma, the kind that made you think he'd been born for more but was just waiting for the right break. I met him at a friend's barbecue. He was wearing a wrinkled button-down and had a ketchup stain near the pocket. The kids clung to his legs the whole time, until Emma cautiously took a bite of the potato salad I'd brought and declared, "This tastes like Sundays." I didn't know what that meant, but she smiled when she said it, and that was enough. David told me over paper plates of ribs that he'd always wanted to go to law school, but the divorce had wrecked him financially. Lisa, his ex, had left without looking back. He was working 2 jobs, weekdays at an insurance call center, weekends stocking shelves overnight. He said he barely remembered what it felt like to sleep through the night. Maybe it was foolishness, or maybe it was instinct, but by the 2nd month, I was coming by after work with groceries and books for the kids. By the 3rd, I was sleeping over on the fold-out couch, and by the 4th, I was putting the kids to bed when David came home too late to remember bedtime stories. I didn't think of it as sacrifice then, I thought of it as love. David got into law school the following spring, a full-time program, 3 years. "It'll change everything," he told me, gripping my hands like I was part of the deal. "Once I'm a lawyer, we'll have a real home, a real life." I said yes before he even asked the question. Of course I'd help. Of course I'd be there. I moved in that summer, boxed up my little studio life, and squeezed myself into a role I hadn't realized had no exit plan. We split bills, but the money got tighter, my hours increased. I picked up weekend shifts at a clinic and started tutoring on the side to cover the gaps. Meanwhile, David studied like a man drowning, and the law library was his only lifeline. The kids didn't understand. Not at first. They'd wait by the window for him to come home. They'd cry when he didn't show for dinner, for birthdays, for bedtime. I would lie with them until their breathing slowed, then sit up for another hour, trying to silence the ache in my chest with reality. He was working hard for us. On weekends, David would crash for hours, exhausted and hollow-eyed. He'd thank me, sometimes with half a kiss on the forehead, or a muttered, "Couldn't do this without you." I held those scraps like medals. I told myself love looked different when you were building something. But slowly, the world narrowed. It became school drop-offs and therapy appointments, forgotten lunchboxes, and laundry that multiplied like guilt. I stopped going out with friends. I missed my 10-year high school reunion because Jake had a stomach bug. I stopped drawing. I'd once dreamed of becoming a pediatric nurse, but applications were put on hold. Always later. Always after David graduated. The kids began calling me Mommy Sarah, sometime in the 2nd year. I didn't correct them. I remember Emma had a fever one night. She woke up shivering and disoriented, soaked in sweat, her little lips trembling. David was at some overnight study lock-in. I held her until dawn, rocking her in the hallway because she didn't want to be in her room alone. When she finally drifted off, she whispered, "I like your hugs better than real moms. They don't feel scared." It was the first time I cried in months, silently, over her shoulder. That fall, David got an internship at a mid-sized law firm. Suddenly, his clothes were sharper. His conversations changed. He talked about litigation strategy over dinner, names I didn't know. His tone when he spoke to me became clipped, efficient. Gratitude turned into assumption. One night, I asked if we could talk about me, about when I could start nursing school, even just part-time. He blinked at me like I'd interrupted a broadcast. "Now's not the time, Sarah. You knew this would be intense." I wanted to believe him. I still thought we were in this together. I still believed that love remembered. But looking back now, sitting in this silent courtroom hallway with my cardigan bunched under me and my hands shaking over my knees, I see it differently. Love isn't a transaction, and it's not a title you earn by putting your dreams away. It's what you do when no one's watching. And I had done it, over and over, until the day he told me I was nothing but help. People say motherhood is instinct, that it kicks in the moment you hold a child, blood or not. Maybe that's true, but for me, it wasn't one moment. It was thousands of them, stacked like chairs after a school recital, unglamorous and unnoticed. David's first semester came with endless books and a kind of tunnel vision that left the rest of us in shadow. The kids needed consistency, and I became it. Not with declarations or big gestures, just in the repetition of care. Wake up, brush teeth, pack lunches, tie shoes, double knot, because Jake always tripped. By 6:30 every morning, I was up. The kitchen smelled of instant coffee and toasted bread. I'd braid Emma's hair while she read aloud from her spelling list. Jake would wobble around in socks too big, his voice sleepy, asking if he had to wear pants again. When I came home from my shift, I cooked dinner while checking math homework, refereeing small fights, and clearing forgotten toys from the hallway. David, if he was home at all, would be in the den, surrounded by highlighters and legal pads. I learned quickly not to interrupt him when the door was closed. That door started staying closed more and more. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't absent in the way some fathers are. He said thank you. He told me, now and then, that he appreciated all I did. But his eyes were always somewhere else, on case law, on outlines, on his future, and in that space between us, I grew invisible. Still, I kept going. Emma had her first tooth pulled that year. She insisted I be the one in the room. Jake got the flu and clung to me so hard he left little crescent moons in my arm where his fingers dug in. I missed a shift to stay with him, sitting by the bathroom door with a bowl and a washcloth, humming softly until he slept. David didn't ask how it went. He just thanked me for handling it. There were little moments of joy that kept me going. Jake coloring cards that read, "To Mommy Sarah." Emma asking if I'd braid her doll's hair to match hers. When the school asked for emergency contacts, my name was the one on every line. One day, during drop-off, a teacher asked, "Are you the guardian?" I hesitated. I wasn't, not legally, but I nodded anyway. It was easier than explaining that the children I raised, the ones who slept with their heads against my chest, still technically belonged to someone who hadn't shown up in a year. Lisa's presence was a ghost in the house, mentioned sometimes, mostly by Emma. She used to let me eat cereal for dinner, she once said, and I didn't know if that was a fond memory or a warning. David rarely spoke of his ex. When he did, it was brief and bitter. She had moved out of state, remarried, her phone number changed, then disconnected. Christmas cards went unanswered. There were moments when I wanted to talk to David about the future, about where I fit, not just in his life, but in the children's. But every time I began, every time I tried to ask about applying to nursing school, or even having my name added to school documents, he changed the subject. "You're doing amazing, Sarah. Let's not mess with what's working." Working for whom? I sometimes wanted to ask, but I never did. I'd tell myself to wait, just a little longer, one more semester, one more year. And in waiting, I gave everything. I stopped buying things for myself. Every spare dollar went to field trip fees, to birthday parties, to new shoes when Jake outgrew his in 3 months. I missed my best friend's wedding because Emma had a school recital and I couldn't find anyone else to take her. I let go of more than I realized, piece by piece, the life I had before David became background noise. At first, I thought maybe that was what love was. Compromise, flexibility. But now, years later, I see the truth more clearly. It was absorption. I had become the scaffolding that held up everyone else's dreams, and no one stopped to ask if I was getting tired. There was a night, it stands out to me even now, when Jake crawled into my lap with his favorite book. It was already late, and I had a migraine creeping in, but he looked up at me and said, "You read better than Daddy. You don't skip pages." I laughed, kissed his forehead, and read the story, even though the words blurred at the edges. David passed the den on his way to the kitchen. He paused just long enough to glance at us. "You're a lifesaver," he said, pouring himself another coffee. I wanted to tell him I wasn't trying to save anyone. I just wanted to be seen. There's a specific kind of invisibility that sets in slowly. It doesn't arrive like a slap or a shout. It arrives like dust, quiet, persistent, and only noticeable when you realize everything you once touched has forgotten your shape. By the time David entered his final year of law school, the rhythm of our house no longer included me as a partner. I wasn't his girlfriend, not in the way the title implied closeness. I was a fixture, helpful, constant, dependable. I was the one who remembered to fill out the school forms, who packed peanut-free snacks for Jake, who ironed David's button-downs for his mock trial presentations. He never asked me to do these things. That was the brilliance of it. When something is done consistently, gratitude fades into expectation. The kids never stopped seeing me. That's what saved me. But the world around us had begun rewriting the story. I noticed it first during a parent-teacher conference. Emma's third-grade teacher, a brisk woman named Ms. Randall, greeted me with a polite smile and said, "And you're the nanny, right?" "No," I answered, smoothing my blouse. "I'm Sarah. I've raised Emma since she was 6. The teacher blinked. "Oh, right, sorry. I didn't see your name on the paperwork." Because it wasn't. Because David had filled it out, and I hadn't thought to double-check. My name wasn't listed anywhere, just David's and Lisa's. I brought it up later that night, after the kids were in bed. David was reviewing some case notes on the couch, his glasses slipping down his nose. "I was listed as other on the school form," I said gently. He looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You didn't include me. They thought I was the nanny." He scoffed. "It's just paperwork, Sarah. Don't get in your head about it." I let the silence stretch until he sighed and added, "Next time, we'll put your name, promise." But there wasn't a next time. Not for that. Not for the next 3 events I handled alone. He had excuses, always. Work, interviews, outlines to finish. Meanwhile, I sat through science fairs and PTA meetings with a forced smile, trying not to shrink beneath the polite glances of other parents who never seemed to know what to make of me. I wasn't the wife, I wasn't the mother, I was the woman who showed up, and in most circles, that wasn't enough. The cracks began to show elsewhere too. David's family came into town that Thanksgiving. They stayed for 4 days. His mother, Joan, was sweet in a clipped, absent-minded way. His brother had brought a new girlfriend, all designer jeans and curious eyes. On the second day, I was in the kitchen, stirring gravy, when I heard Joan say to her son in the living room, "She's been great help to you, must be a relief." Help. That word rang like a dropped fork. Not partner, not stepmother, not even Sarah, just help, like a temporary hire, like a live-in favor. David didn't correct her. That night, I cried in the shower, quietly, pressing a towel to my mouth so the kids wouldn't hear. When I told my best friend Kira about it over the phone later that week, she hesitated. Then she said, "I know you love those kids, Sar, but how long can you keep giving this much with nothing to show for it?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. Because I'd already begun building a life around a foundation that never included me. I had stopped drawing. I hadn't opened my nursing school application files in over a year. My calendar was filled with pediatric checkups and parent portals and grocery runs for snacks Emma liked. I knew their shoe sizes by heart. I didn't remember the last time I'd bought new shoes for myself. Then came Lisa's email. It was the first contact in over a year. She wanted to see the kids for a weekend. No explanation. Just a line. "I'll be flying in Saturday. Can I pick them up at 10? I forwarded it to David. His response was curt. "We'll talk about it tonight." But we didn't. He went out after work with classmates, came home smelling like whiskey and peppermint gum. The next morning, I found myself texting Lisa instead. "They'll be ready." When Saturday arrived, she was late. Of course she was. And when she finally pulled up, she didn't even step out of the car. She honked like she was picking up dry cleaning. Emma's hand squeezed mine tight as I walked them to the curb. "I don't want to go," Jake whispered. "Just for the weekend," I said softly, bending to fix his collar. "It'll be okay." Lisa didn't look at me when she popped the door. She just said, "Thanks," and drove away before I could say a word. I stood on the sidewalk long after the car disappeared. That afternoon, the house was silent. David was gone again, some networking brunch with a firm partner. I sat on the couch, stared at the blank TV screen, and tried to remember the last time someone had asked me how I was doing. The answer wouldn't come. The first time Emma called me Mom, it slipped out like breath. We were in the school parking lot, the late autumn wind chasing the leaves across the asphalt. She turned back to grab her lunchbox from the back seat, and as she shut the door, she said, "Thanks, Mom," then froze. Her eyes darted to mine, wide, apologetic. I said nothing, just smiled and handed her the scarf she'd left on the seat. She wore it without complaint. That was the real surprise. When she came home that evening, David wasn't there. He had a night class, or maybe it was mock court again. I didn't bother asking anymore. Jake had a loose tooth and was sulking about it, refusing to eat the apple slices I'd laid out. Emma sat beside him and whispered, "She'll pull it for you." He frowned. "It'll hurt." Emma shook her head. "Nope, she's good." She pulled mine, barely even felt it. And just like that, I became the tooth fairy, the nurse, the safe place they turned to. David had stopped noticing the shifts, or maybe he noticed and didn't care, as long as things stayed smooth. When he did join us at the dinner table, he barely listened. His eyes flicked to his phone between bites. Once when Emma tried to tell him about her spelling bee, he nodded absently and muttered, "That's great, honey," without looking up. She never finished the story. I did, later while folding her socks and braiding her hair for bed. There was no big confrontation, no sudden betrayal, just the slow erosion of presence, like tide eating away at sandcastles. One night, Jake had a nightmare, one of the bad ones. He woke screaming, not with fear, but with anger. Why didn't she come back? Why doesn't she want me? It took me 30 minutes to get him calm. His little fists punched my chest at first, and then clung to me with a desperation I didn't know he still carried. I sat with him on the bathroom floor, running cool water over a washcloth, gently wiping the sweat from his forehead. I hummed an old lullaby my own mother used to sing to me. He didn't ask for David. He didn't call for Lisa. He clung to me. The next morning, David asked if Jake had trouble sleeping. I told him the truth. "You were up with him again?" he said, pouring coffee like it was routine. "God, I don't know how you do it." "I do it," I said slowly, "because someone has to." He blinked, misreading the tone. "I mean it. You're incredible." But the words didn't land anymore. They passed over me like wind through a cracked window. Later that month, Emma started her first period. I found her curled up in the upstairs bathroom, mortified and pale. She tried to pretend she was fine, but her eyes were brimming with tears. "I ruined my jeans," she whispered. I sat on the floor with her, back against the cold tile, and told her about my first time, about how it happened during gym class, and how I bled through my skirt. I told her about the kind nurse who handed me a spare uniform and a smile. Emma laughed through her tears. "Did she have pink hair like Mrs. Donnelly?" "No," I said, but she let me cry without making it worse. That weekend, we went to the store together. I let her pick out whatever she wanted. Pads, chocolate, a little heating pad with a rabbit face. I showed her how to log her cycle, how to use the heating pad safely, and told her what cramps felt like. She called me Mom again that week, but this time she didn't take it back. Lisa didn't show for her next visit. No call, no email, just silence. David said little about it. His frustration passed quickly, swept under talk of an upcoming interview with a mid-tier firm. "She's not dependable," he said. "The kids are better off without her." I didn't disagree, but I also didn't celebrate it. You don't win something just because someone else forfeits. That's not how love works. Still, things kept building. Teacher notes came home with Mom scrawled across the top. Jake drew a picture in crayon, 3 figures holding hands under a crooked sun. He labeled them, me, Emma, Mom. There was no fourth person, no David, no Lisa. I folded that picture and tucked it into my wallet. At bedtime, Emma began asking bigger questions. "Did you always want to be a mom?" she said one night, curled beside me under the patchwork quilt I'd sewn the previous Christmas. "I think," I said slowly, "I wanted to be someone a child could count on. I didn't know what it would look like back then, but I think I got it right." She turned her face into my shoulder. "I hope you don't ever leave." My breath caught. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, "not unless I have to." And I meant it. Even if the law didn't recognize me, even if David didn't, even if the woman who gave them life never lifted another finger, I had become their mother. Not by blood, not by paperwork, but by every scraped knee, every whispered fear, every forgotten science project I helped rebuild with cardboard and tape at 10 p.m. They were mine. Because I never stopped showing up. David graduated in May. The sun was bright that day, unseasonably hot, and my blouse clung to my back as I stood outside the university auditorium with the kids. Emma wore a dress I'd ironed at dawn. Jake tugged at his too-tight collar and asked every 10 minutes when we could go home. We'd made a sign, "We're proud of you, Daddy," in glittery letters. Emma held it high, even when her arms ached. When David finally appeared in his cap and gown, surrounded by classmates in expensive suits and Instagram-ready smiles, we cheered. Jake ran to him. Emma followed. I stood a few feet behind, camera in hand. He hugged them both, kissed their foreheads. Then he turned to me and said, "Hey, can you take a group photo of us? My mom's meeting us at the restaurant, and I want something quick for Facebook." I did. I lined up the shot, framed it well, smiled as I clicked the shutter. He didn't ask me to be in the photo. At the dinner afterward, I sat at the far end of the table, next to Jake, while David's friends and family toasted his journey. His mother gave a speech about how proud we all are of this brilliant young man who worked so hard and made all the sacrifices. David raised his glass with a grin. No one looked in my direction. I ate my grilled salmon in silence. When the dessert came, Emma reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it. "She forgot you," she whispered. I smiled and said, "It's okay, sweetheart." But it wasn't. Not really. Later that night, while the kids were asleep, I asked David about the future. Just gently, just honestly. I wanted to know where I fit, now that the storm had passed. If we could finally talk about my nursing school application, which had been sitting untouched in the desk drawer since the start of his first semester. He leaned against the kitchen counter, drink in hand. "I thought we were past all that," he said. "Now's not the right time to shift focus. I just got out of school. Things are going to be hectic." "I supported you for 3 years," I said. "I'm not asking for the moon. I just want to plan for my life again." He sighed like he was tired, like the weight of my needs was another exam he hadn't studied for. "I never asked you to give anything up," he muttered. That sentence landed like a slap. Not in tone, but in cruelty, the kind that's wrapped in calmness. "You let me," I said. He didn't reply. We drifted, quietly, after that. Days passed. He started going to interviews, some local, some out of state. I only knew because I found an itinerary in the printer tray. When I asked him about it, he said, "I didn't want to stress you until it was firm." Like my life didn't deserve consultation, only announcements. It was around that time I started feeling truly alone in a house I'd made livable. The kids still clung to me, still asked for help with projects and bedtime stories. But David? He was floating above us, detached, absorbed in a new identity. On my birthday, I came downstairs early. Emma and Jake had made me breakfast, slightly burnt toast with jam and a card folded 3 times over. It said, "To the best almost mom ever." Emma had drawn us holding hands under a rainbow. I held it like it was made of glass. David didn't wake until nearly noon. He had forgotten. He offered to order dinner as a makeup gesture, but I told him not to bother. That evening, he took a call on the back porch. I overheard enough to understand. It was a job offer from a firm in Denver. He accepted it. I wasn't mentioned. When I confronted him, he shrugged. "It's a great opportunity. We'll figure out logistics." "We?" I asked. He looked up, blinked. "You and the kids can stay here," he said. "I'll fly back for visits. It's not permanent, just a start." "What about me?" I asked. He paused, then said, "Look, Sarah, we're not married. You've been amazing, but this arrangement, it was never meant to be forever. You helped me get through school, but the kids have a real mother. You've been help. That word again. It wasn't the volume that hurt, it was the vacancy behind it. Like everything I'd poured into those children, into him, into this life we built, had evaporated into some filing cabinet labeled support staff. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I stood still, watching him sip his drink like we were discussing utility bills. "Thank you," I said finally. He looked confused. "For what?" "For showing me exactly where I stand." That night, while the kids slept, I packed a single bag. Nothing dramatic, just what I'd brought into this life. My wallet, a few clothes, and the envelope containing my untouched nursing school application. I left a note on the fridge. It read, "Tell the kids I love them. I'll explain everything when I can. I'm not gone, I'm just choosing to matter again." And I walked out the door with shaking hands. The apartment was quiet when I unlocked the door, more storage unit than sanctuary. I hadn't been back in over 3 years. The air smelled of dust and loneliness. I turned on the lamp beside the sagging couch and stood in the middle of the room, unsure whether I'd made a decision or simply run out of choices. I unpacked slowly. The few clothes I brought hung in the closet like strangers. My nursing school application still sat in the manila envelope, now creased at the edges. I laid it flat on the kitchen table and stared at it like it was something I no longer recognized. The hardest part came that night. Emma called. Her number showed up on my phone while I sat curled on the floor, back pressed against the old radiator. I answered without thinking. "Where are you?" Her voice was small, almost trembling. "I needed time," I said. "I'll explain when I can. I made pancakes this morning, but they burned. Daddy didn't wake up." Jake cried. I felt the ache move behind my eyes. "I miss you," she whispered. "I miss you too," I said, "so much." Then Jake's voice came through faintly in the background. "Did Mommy Sarah leave forever?" I couldn't answer. I ended the call before the silence made it worse. The next day, I wrote them both letters, age-appropriate, careful, full of love and apologies. I didn't blame David, not to them. I told them I needed to remember who I was, that it didn't mean I loved them less. I mailed the letters and tried to rebuild myself. Week by week, I returned to my old self. Not the same version, but something close. I picked up shifts at a local clinic. I reactivated my nursing school file and scheduled the interview I'd postponed years ago. The silence in my apartment was thick, but it allowed space to think again. My therapist, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, asked me during our second session, if the children were gone from the picture, would you still feel grief? Yes, I said without pause, but it wouldn't be this kind. This kind? The kind that feels like betrayal, sewn into bone. Because that's what it was, not just the loss of love, the dismantling of identity. For years I'd lived a life defined by caretaking. It wasn't that I didn't matter, I had simply become a tool, and when the task was over, the tool was put away. The calls from the kids became less frequent. David didn't reach out at all. I heard through mutual friends that his move to Denver had been delayed, that the job was more demanding than expected. One mentioned, with a twinge of concern, that the new nanny had quit after 2 weeks. He's struggling with the kids, they said. Can't keep up. I felt no joy in that, only ache. Then, one Thursday morning, as I was leaving the clinic, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but local. It was the school nurse. Jake had a fever, high, sudden. Emergency contact lists hadn't been updated. You're still listed as primary, she said. Can you come? I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask if David was informed. I drove. When I arrived, Jake was curled on a cot in the nurse's office, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy. He lit up when he saw me. "Mommy Sarah," he whispered. I gathered him into my arms. He felt smaller than I remembered, lighter somehow. David arrived 20 minutes later, flustered, keys jangling, shirt half-tucked. "I didn't know they still had you down," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'm glad they did," I replied. He glanced at Jake, then back at me. I didn't know who else to call. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Later that evening, after Jake had been settled at home and Emma had cried into my arms on the porch, David asked if I'd stay the weekend to help while Jake recovered. "I can't do this alone," he admitted. "You were always doing it with me," I said. "You just stopped looking." He didn't argue. That weekend passed in a blur of medicine doses and soup bowls. Emma clung to me like a vine to a wall. Jake slept with his head on my lap. David gave me space, almost like he understood now, or maybe he simply didn't have the energy to fight. On Sunday night, I packed to leave. Emma begged me to stay. "You're our mom," she said quietly. "Real or not?" David stood behind her, wordless. I kissed her forehead. "I'll always be yours, but I can't stay invisible." She didn't understand that yet, but one day she would. As I walked to the car, David followed me down the steps. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I just thought I had more time to figure things out." "You did," I said, "and you used it." He nodded slowly, shame softening his jaw. "Sarah, if Lisa tries to come back, would you help me fight?" I turned. "Why would I?" "Because she's not their mother, and you are." I looked up at the sky, then back at him. "Then maybe you should say that in court." And I left him standing there, with his hands in his pockets and the door behind him wide open. I used to believe that love alone could hold a house together, that if you were steady enough, if you showed up every day with warm meals and clean sheets and open arms, people would recognize it for what it was, family. But there comes a point when consistency becomes camouflage. You blend so well into the background, no one remembers you're carrying the weight. That Monday morning, I woke in my apartment with the covers tangled around my legs and a heaviness in my chest that hadn't let up since I left their house. The weekend had cracked something open, and I was still sifting through what had spilled out. Jake had recovered. Emma had laughed again. David had looked at me differently, not with affection, not with contempt, but as someone suddenly visible, like a figure emerging from fog. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. I called the nursing school just after 9, confirmed my orientation date. They asked if I'd be available to assist a pediatric clinic during winter placement. I said yes. My voice didn't waver, but my hand did, resting on the kitchen table like it was anchoring me to the moment. I didn't hear from David for 2 weeks. Then a manila envelope arrived at my door. No return address, just my name. Inside was a copy of the custody modification paperwork. Lisa had filed for shared custody again, citing parental alienation and claiming the children had been withheld emotionally and geographically since the divorce. David's signature was scrawled across the response page. He was contesting it, but tucked between the legal pages was a single post-it note in his handwriting. "I'll need your statement. I understand if you say no." There was no manipulation in it, no assumption, just a quiet request. I closed the envelope and sat with it for a long time. The kids' faces flashed through my memory like lanterns on dark water. Emma's careful handwriting, Jake's whispered, "Mommy Sarah," the smell of oatmeal and cinnamon in the mornings, the sound of tiny footsteps padding down the hall. I hadn't left them. I had left the lie. But now the truth was being challenged, and I couldn't pretend I didn't care. That night, I walked to the post office before it closed. I mailed a letter to my old attorney, the same one I'd spoken to years earlier when David and I still shared a kitchen. I told him everything: the years of unpaid caregiving, the sleepless nights, the appointments, the PTA meetings, the drawings, the scraped knees, the lullabies, the small sacrifices that built a childhood. Not mine, but theirs. And I ended the letter with a question: do I have standing? 3 days later, he called. "You may," he said, "depending on your state laws and the court's interpretation of psychological parenting. You won't get full custody, but visitation, shared decision-making, it's possible. What would it take? Proof, records, consistency, and willingness." I didn't respond right away. My silence stretched long enough for him to say gently, "Are you willing, Sarah?" "I don't know what I'm more afraid of," I finally said. "Losing them or finally being seen." I spent the next week digging through drawers, boxes, digital folders. I found old permission slips with my handwriting, emergency contact forms listing me as primary. I had emails from teachers, voicemails from the school nurse, photos of science fair boards we built together, copies of Jake's vaccination forms I signed, birthday invitations with my return address. I printed everything. One morning, I drove past their house. The lawn was overgrown. A scooter lay abandoned in the driveway. The porch light was still on in daylight. I didn't knock. I didn't park. I just drove slowly, trying not to feel like a stranger in what had once been my second skin. Back home, I drafted my affidavit. I kept it factual but honest. No bitterness, just the quiet record of years poured into children I had not birthed but had mothered in every real way. The final sentence read, "I do not seek to replace anyone. I only ask to remain in their lives where I have always been." When I sent the documents to the attorney, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. There was power in truth, even when whispered. I told the kids a week later, when I met them for lunch at the public library's cafe. Emma clutched my hand tight when I said it. Jake asked if it meant he had to pick between me and his dad. "No," I said, "it means you get to keep all the people who love you." Emma nodded slowly. "Good, because you're the one who remembers how I like my eggs." It was a small thing, but it held everything. Healing didn't arrive like a revelation. It came slowly, almost grudgingly, stitched together from the small hours of quiet mornings, the deliberate act of making my own bed, and learning to sleep through the night without a child's cry calling me back to purpose. After filing the affidavit and submitting the documentation, my days took on a strange rhythm. I returned to my clinic shifts with sharper focus. The children there reminded me of Emma and Jake in flashes, the way a boy clutched his stuffed dinosaur during a vaccination, or how a girl nervously asked if her mom was coming back after surgery. I always answered with more kindness than protocol required, because I knew what it felt like to wait on promises. At home, I kept my space neat, but lived in. I had pinned Jake's crayon drawing me with an oversized smile and spaghetti arms on the fridge door. The nursing school orientation packet sat on the counter, still unread. I wanted to begin, but my mind tugged in two directions, forward and back. Some evenings I read, others I sat in silence, staring at the empty chair across from mine at the table. That was where Emma used to eat her toast crust first, and where Jake would swing his legs until they smacked the underside. Now it was just a chair, holding the echo of what had been. Therapy helped. Elena, my therapist, listened without judgment. She never rushed me toward closure. "I'm afraid I gave so much of myself," I said one day, "that there's nothing left for this next part." She looked at me gently and said, "But aren't you still here?" That question lingered. In the second week of March, I received a formal response from the court. My petition had been accepted for review. There would be a preliminary hearing to assess standing and intent. A family court judge would determine whether I had grounds to seek visitation or joint decision-making based on psychological parenting. My hands trembled as I held the envelope, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't just a legal step. It was a declaration: I exist in their lives, and I will not be erased. I called David that night. It was late, and I expected his voice to be tired, maybe guarded. Instead, he answered softly. "Hey, I got the hearing date," I said. A pause. "Yeah, the kids told me. They're happy." That surprised me. "They're not scared?" They were, at first. But they understand now. "You're not trying to take anything. You're trying to keep what's real." It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. He cleared his throat. "Lisa hasn't responded yet, but I don't think she will. You never know." "No," he said, "but I do know this. You were the one who stayed." That should have comforted me, and maybe part of it did. But I also knew what it cost me to stay. And now I was doing something different. I was choosing. A week before the hearing, Emma and Jake came to visit. Not for an afternoon, but an entire overnight stay. David dropped them off at the apartment with backpacks and a tentative wave. It was their first time seeing where I lived. "This is so small," Jake said, wandering the hallway. Emma sniffed the air. "It smells like lavender." "I like it," Jake said quickly. "It feels like you." We made pancakes for dinner, because they insisted. Emma wanted to fold laundry with me, just because it felt normal. Jake asked if he could sleep in my bed, which I allowed. Emma curled up on the couch with a book I used to read to her years ago and fell asleep halfway through the chapter. That night, I didn't cry. I just lay awake between them, Jake breathing softly against my arm, Emma murmuring something in her sleep, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. It wasn't about reclaiming what had been lost. It was about anchoring what remained. The next morning, as we walked to the nearby park, Emma turned to me and said, "I told my teacher you're my mom. I know it's not on paper, but I wanted her to know." I stopped in my tracks. "What did she say?" "She said that makes sense." My throat tightened, but I nodded. That's all I've ever wanted, for the truth to make sense to people. We sat on the bench near the swings, just the three of us. The sun warmed our backs. The air smelled of cut grass and spring. Jake climbed the jungle gym, while Emma leaned her head on my shoulder. "I hope the judge sees it too," she said. I looked at her, at this child who had grown up in my arms, and whispered, "I think they will." And even if they didn't, some truths live louder than court records. The call came at 2:13 a.m. I'd been asleep only a few hours. The window cracked for the first spring breeze, the air carrying in faint sirens and the occasional bark from the alley below. My phone rang sharp against the silence. "Sarah?" David's voice was tight. "It's Jake." My stomach clenched before my mind could catch up. "He's in the hospital. Appendicitis. They're prepping for surgery." I was already pulling on my pants. The pink cardigan I kept draped over the armchair, going on without thought. The only words I managed were, "Which hospital?" The emergency room was lit like a supermarket, cold, too bright, and indifferent to the hour. When I arrived, David was pacing outside a set of double doors, hair uncombed, shirt misbuttoned. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me as if I were the only part of the room that made sense. "They sedated him," he finally said. "They're taking him back now." "Emma?" "With my mom," he added. "She didn't want to see him like this." I nodded, then pushed past him, into the hallway leading to pre-op. The nurse at the station stopped me. "Only one parent allowed." "He's listed me," I said before she could finish. "Check." She looked up the chart, brows furrowing. My name was still there, from all those years ago. David had never updated it, either from oversight or inertia. Maybe some part of him didn't dare. She gave a tight nod and led me back. Jake was small in the bed, smaller than I remembered. Tubes taped to his hand, a monitor beeping steady but slow. His eyes fluttered open when I took his hand. "Mommy Sarah?" he whispered, groggy and confused. "I'm here, baby," I said, brushing hair from his forehead. "I'm right here." He winced, then relaxed again. "Hurts." "I know," I said softly, leaning in. "But they're going to fix it, and I'm not leaving until you're better." The surgery was successful. An hour and 12 minutes. I stayed in the waiting room alone, because David couldn't sit still and had left for coffee, then didn't return until the doctor walked out. "He's doing fine," the surgeon said. Woke up asking for his real mom. David turned to me. I think he meant you. It wasn't an apology. It was a reckoning. Jake stayed in the hospital for 2 nights. I remained beside his bed, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest, helping the nurses when I could. Emma visited the second evening, bringing him a drawing of a smiling kidney and a cartoon bandage. Mommy Sarah slept in the chair all night, she told him proudly. Jake smiled faintly and took my hand. Can she come home now? The room went quiet. David looked away. 3 days later, I returned to my apartment, exhausted beyond language. The silence inside felt different this time, more like pause than absence. My bag still sat in the hallway, half unpacked from the overnight. I hadn't eaten more than crackers in 2 days. I collapsed into the armchair, still in my cardigan, and stared at nothing. Was this what motherhood was supposed to feel like? Endless tension between being needed and being dismissed, between sacrifice and erasure? I'd done everything right, and still I was always outside the boundary, not on paper, not in title, but something had changed in Jake's eyes, in Emma's posture, in the way David had finally stopped correcting their language when they said Mom. That night, I opened my laptop and drafted a new statement for the upcoming hearing. It wasn't legal jargon, it was a letter. A letter to the court, to the world, to myself. It began, I have been their mother since the day I chose them, day after day, when others did not. 2 days later, David called. She filed a formal objection, he said. Lisa. Of course she had. She wants full custody back, says you're interfering. I sat quietly for a moment, then said, does she know Jake asked for me? She doesn't care. Then we show them, I said. Everything. He exhaled, shaky. You're really going to testify? I'm not going to let them forget me, I replied. He didn't speak for a moment. I don't deserve your help, he finally said. But the kids do. That much was true. I spent the next several nights assembling everything I had, emails from doctors, school records, photos, hand-drawn birthday cards. I printed a photo of Jake in the hospital, my hand holding his while he slept, our fingers tangled on top of the blanket. Then I pulled out a framed crayon drawing he had made when he was 7. It was the 3 of us, me, Emma, and him, on a swing set. The caption read, Me and my real family. I placed that on top. No blood, no legal certificate, just ink, love, and memory. Sometimes the truth doesn't shout, it waits. But when it's finally called to speak, it knows exactly what to say. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday, family court downtown, 4th floor, across from the rust-stained government building I used to pass on the way to Emma's school. I hadn't been back there in years, not since the day I picked up their birth certificates for a school transfer and watched the clerk glance at me and say, You'll need the biological mother's signature. This time I arrived early, too early. I sat in the hallway for nearly 40 minutes before the courtroom doors opened. Pale blue carpet, plastic chairs lined along the wall, the kind of institutional quiet that dulls even the sharpest thoughts. I clutched a manila folder on my lap. Inside were the documents I'd assembled, along with the letter I'd written in case I couldn't speak. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from clarity. There's a particular weight to standing up after years of being dismissed. It stiffens your spine, sharpens your voice. David arrived 5 minutes before we were called in. He looked rested, ironed, prepared, a man with a suit and a lawyer. Lisa came in next, tall, polished, her heels tapping with purpose, her lips pursed when she saw me. She didn't nod, she didn't speak, just took her place behind her attorney, who looked younger than most of my clinic patients' parents. I didn't have a lawyer. I'd made that decision deliberately. I wanted to speak for myself. The judge was a woman in her 50s, hair cropped close to the scalp, glasses perched low on her nose. Her tone was neutral, but not unkind. We began with procedural matters. Lisa's attorney made her case first. Legal definitions, parental rights, claims of alienation and miscommunication. I sat quietly, watching Lisa nod at all the right times. Her eyes flicked to me occasionally, like I was something unfortunate she'd stepped around. Then it was David's attorney. She presented our side, a counterclaim based on psychological parenting, the children's wishes, and my documented role in their lives. She listed the number of years I had lived with them, cared for them, and been recognized by their schools, doctors, and neighbors as the children's de facto parent. I thought of Jake's fevered hand in mine, of Emma's whispered, "Don't leave." Then they asked me to speak. I stood, steady, folder in hand. I didn't come here to argue about biology, I began. I came here because love alone doesn't always write itself into legal forms. The judge gestured for me to continue. I moved in when Emma was 6, Jake was 4, I was David's partner, but I became their caretaker, their emergency contact, the person who stayed up all night during stomach flus and read permission slips in the dark. I know Emma likes her sandwich crusts cut off, and that Jake pretends he doesn't cry at movies but always does when the music swells. Lisa's attorney shifted. I didn't ask for this hearing, I continued, but when I was called nothing but help, I realized how easy it is for the world to forget women like me, the ones who build families in the shadows of other people's names. I paused. I don't want to erase anyone, but I won't be erased either. The courtroom went still. Even Lisa looked up for the first time without disdain. I submitted my documents. The judge nodded and requested a short recess before the children would be interviewed privately. In the hallway, I sat again, hands folded over the folder, now resting by my side. David approached cautiously. "You spoke well," he said quietly. "I didn't do it for praise." He nodded. "I know. I'm just glad you did it." I looked at him. This man I once believed would build a life with me. Now just a father I happen to love beside. "You're lucky," I said. "They still trust you." He lowered his gaze. "They trust you more." After the interviews, we were called back in. The judge's demeanor hadn't changed, but something in her eyes had softened. "I've reviewed the materials, listened to all parties, and considered the statements made," she said. She adjusted her glasses. "It is the court's determination that Miss Sarah Alden be recognized as a psychological parent to both minors and granted shared legal custody, alongside Mr. David Ellis, with structured visitation privileges extended in accordance with the children's expressed preferences." Lisa flinched. The judge continued. "It is further ordered that Miss Alden be included in educational, medical, and personal decisions involving both children moving forward. Ms. Lisa Harmon's request for primary custody is denied." The words hung in the air like a bell tolling in reverse, clear, final, reverent. I didn't cry, I didn't cheer, I simply exhaled. Not because I had won, but because I had finally been named. Outside, the sky had shifted into late afternoon. Emma and Jake waited in the lobby with a court liaison. When they saw me, they ran. Emma got to me first. She threw her arms around my waist and said, "They told us." Jake looked up with his tired, honest eyes. "So you're really Mom now?" I knelt and kissed his forehead. I always was. When the court made its decision, I didn't celebrate. Not in the way people expect when something hard-won finally arrives. There were no toasts, no balloons, no dancing in the kitchen, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator in my apartment and a long, steady exhale as I sat at the table and reread the custody ruling 3 times to make sure I hadn't imagined it. Recognition doesn't come with fanfare. It comes with paperwork, with signatures and dates and formal acknowledgments that read like a birth certificate carved from lived experience. The first thing I did was make copies, neatly stacked, labeled, and placed in the lockbox beneath my bed. One for the school, one for the pediatrician, one for myself. I didn't want to risk anyone forgetting. The second thing I did was go through the rest of the evidence, not because the court needed it anymore, but because I did. Because sometimes you need to lay the truth out where it can't be denied. The folder was thick, the pages well thumbed, years of proof that I had existed in their lives even when others tried to write me out of the story. I found a birthday invitation from when Emma turned 9. Her handwriting was large and loopy. "Come to my house. Mommy Sarah is making cupcakes." I remembered those cupcakes. Red velvet, overfilled liners, cream cheese frosting that melted slightly because the oven ran too hot. I'd stayed up until midnight baking them after a long shift. David had been in a meeting. Lisa hadn't called. Then there were the school enrollment papers, each one listing me as the emergency contact, my signature looping next to the boxes for authorized pickup. Receipts for winter coats, prescription refills, field trip fees, the small economics of care. Photographs too, dozens. Jake, missing a front tooth, laughing in my lap as we colored together. Emma in a Halloween costume I stitched by hand, fabric and time stretched to make a fairy out of glitter and hope. Each photo, a testament, not posed, not curated, just moments that lived between meals and meltdowns. In the middle of the folder, I found something I hadn't remembered saving, a drawing of a stick figure family. Me in the center, with arms stretching across the page, Emma and Jake on either side, above us, in large letters, "My mom makes me feel safe." I touched the paper like it might dissolve, because even if everything else failed, that one sentence made the years worth it. I brought the folder with me when I picked them up the next weekend. It wasn't a legal requirement. It was just my way of proving I had nothing left to prove. Emma noticed it on the seat beside me. "Is that the court stuff?" she asked. "It's everything we built," I said, "in case you ever forget how real it was." Jake leaned forward from the back seat. "I don't forget." I smiled at them both. That's what matters. That weekend, we made pancakes again. Jake was tall enough now to pour the batter himself. He still made a mess, but this time, I didn't flinch. I let him drip, scrape, flip, and grin. Emma helped me reorganize the linen closet. She folded towels with too much precision, but I let her anyway. I think she just wanted to be near me. At bedtime, they asked if I'd read to them like I used to. "I thought you two were too old for that," I teased. Emma rolled her eyes. "You're never too old for that voice you do." So I read, from the same old book, my voice slipping into the rhythm that used to carry them into sleep. Jake was out within 10 minutes. Emma stayed awake a little longer. As I tucked the blanket under her chin, she asked, "Do you think she'll ever stop trying to come back?" I didn't pretend not to know who she meant. "Maybe, maybe not. She doesn't love us like you do." I didn't correct her. I just kissed her forehead and whispered, "You're safe now." On Sunday, after David picked them up, I sat back down at the kitchen table and opened the folder again, not out of doubt, but out of reverence. This was our archive, the narrative stitched from sweat, quiet gestures, and long nights. Later, I boxed it all up, every paper, every photo, every note from teachers and drawings on crumpled napkins. I labeled the box for Emma and Jake when they're ready. Because one day, they'd be grown, and maybe they'd wonder, maybe someone would try to tell them a different story. And when that day came, I wanted them to have more than memory. I wanted them to have the record. Proof that love, real, lived-in daily love, isn't loud, but it leaves a trail. I didn't sleep much the night before the final hearing. Not because of fear, though there was some of that. Mostly it was the weight of anticipation, the long-held breath that had stretched through years of quiet caregiving, of being unnamed, unseen. And now, after everything, I was expected to speak one more time, not just to defend myself, but to defend the love that had filled those years, morning to night, minute to minute. I wore the pink cardigan. I almost chose something different, something newer, more formal, but it felt wrong. That cardigan had caught juice stains, tears, and paint smudges from 2 growing lives. It had carried Jake's sleep-heavy head after nightmares and Emma's arms around my waist after hard school days. If I was going to be heard, I wanted their lives on my shoulders. David and I sat apart in the courtroom. We didn't need to exchange words. Everything between us now existed in a kind of unspoken truth. We were both trying, in our flawed ways, to protect the same 2 hearts. Lisa didn't show. Her lawyer explained she was traveling and had submitted her final statement in writing. The judge's gaze was impassive, but I saw the tightening of her mouth. She had heard enough empty explanations before. The first part of the hearing moved fast. Legal formalities, summary of prior rulings. David's lawyer made a short statement confirming joint legal custody and that he supported my request for expanded visitation and official recognition as a decision-maker in the children's lives. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand and swore in. The chair was cold against my back, the microphone close enough to catch my breath. I looked at the judge, but I spoke to a room much larger than that. I'm not here because I want to replace anyone. I'm here because for years I lived at the center of 2 children's lives. I packed their lunches. I cleaned up after their fevers. I watched them grow. I paused. There was no applause, no title. I didn't do it for credit. I did it because when you love someone, truly love them, you show up, and I showed up. The judge asked a few questions. Polite, measured, but her tone shifted as I spoke, not warmer, but deeper, as if she understood that this wasn't just about custody, it was about recognition. "Do the children consider you their mother?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. They do, and they have for years, even when they were told not to. "And what do you believe your role is now?" "To remain," I said, "no matter what title the world gives me." The judge leaned back, folded her hands, then thanked me. Jake and Emma weren't in the courtroom, but they'd met privately with the family liaison earlier that morning. They'd spoken for themselves. I would learn later what Emma had said. She's the one who stayed, even when we didn't ask, even when it was hard. The decision was issued that afternoon, in chambers. We were called back in at 4:02 p.m. The courtroom felt smaller by then, like something had compressed in the hours we waited. The judge read without theatrics. It is the court's final ruling that Miss Sarah Alden is to be recognized as a psychological parent with shared legal authority and scheduled residential custody, rotating on weekends and holidays, with flexibility for the children's school and social needs. I didn't cry until she said this. It is further noted that the court recognizes Miss Alden's role in the minors' lives as not only consistent and substantial, but stabilizing and nurturing. Her relationship with the children is in their best interest and shall be protected. Protected. I had been so long in defense that I hadn't imagined the court itself would defend me. David reached over and touched my hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. I looked at him, at the father of the children I had raised. "No," I said, "thank you for stepping aside and letting them speak for themselves." The kids met me on the courthouse steps, this time not with tears or confusion, but with relief, with understanding. Emma handed me a folded note. Inside was a drawing, a house, a cat, 3 stick figures and the words, "Now it's real." Jake hugged my waist and asked if we could make grilled cheese that weekend. "I want mine cut, like you always do," he said. "You mean in triangles?" He nodded. "Diagonals taste better." I laughed. "Of course they do." We didn't celebrate with anything fancy, just went to the diner near my apartment, ordered milkshakes and fries, and shared a booth too small for 3 people who loved each other this much. Emma sat next to me, holding my hand under the table. Jake leaned on my shoulder, half asleep by the time the check came. I looked at them, these 2 growing lives, and felt something shift. Not relief. Not triumph. Just stillness. Like something that had always been true, had finally been said out loud, in front of the world, and couldn't be taken back. The first weekend they stayed with me after the ruling, it rained. Not a soft, polite rain, but a spring storm with wind that rattled the windows and low gray clouds that hovered like they were waiting for something to change. We stayed in, all 3 of us. The living room became a nest of blankets and board games. Jake made a fort between the couch cushions. Emma curled next to me on the floor, her head resting on my hip as I read aloud from an old book we hadn't opened in years. At some point, the lights flickered. We lit candles just in case, and it turned the apartment into something soft and old-fashioned, as if the world outside had slowed to let us hold still a while longer. Later, I stood at the stove stirring soup, while Jake set the table and Emma flipped through a small box of photographs I'd kept in the cupboard above the sink. She pulled one out, her 6th birthday party, frosting on her nose. My arm wrapped around her from behind, David just outside the frame. "Do you think I'll remember all of this when I'm older?" she asked. I turned off the burner. "I think you already are." That night, after they were asleep, I sat alone in the quiet. The pink cardigan was draped over the back of the kitchen chair, sleeves still damp from Jake's spilled juice. I held it in my lap, smoothing the fabric with my fingers, and realized something I hadn't been able to put words to before. For years, I'd fought for a place in their lives, through diapers, school plays, scraped knees, forgotten birthdays, and courthouse silence. I'd clung to the idea that love had to be proven, that care had to be defended. But now? Now I just had to live it, steady, consistent, unafraid. A month passed. Emma got a part in the school play. Jake started reading chapter books on his own. The rhythm of our weekends became their own quiet world. Library trips, pancakes on Sundays, movie nights with popcorn that always ended up between the cushions. One Friday afternoon, as I waited outside the school in my car, one of the other parents knocked on the window. "Are you their grandmother?" she asked, tilting her head with polite curiosity. "No," I said. Then I smiled. "I'm their other mother." She blinked. "Oh, I didn't know." "You do now." Emma and Jake came running out a few seconds later, backpacks bouncing. Jake's shoelace was untied. Emma handed me a paper with a smiley face sticker and the word "outstanding" in red ink. And that was enough. At the end of the school year, the community center hosted a celebration, a small banquet for volunteers, caregivers, and school partners. David invited me to attend. "They're giving out honors to people who've helped support the children through hardship," he said. "You should be there." I almost said no, Not because I didn't want to be recognized, but because part of me had learned to expect my name not to be called. Still, I went. The banquet was simple. Plastic chairs, folding tables with wrinkled white cloths, paper centerpieces shaped like apples and stars. Emma wore a navy dress. Jake had on a tie that kept slipping to the side. I watched from the back as they called up names: teachers, coaches, lunch ladies, crossing guards, the unsung keepers of childhood. Then, unexpectedly, the microphone squealed, and a quiet voice announced, "This last recognition goes to someone who wasn't listed on a form, but who never missed a moment." I froze. Emma stepped up to the mic. She helped us do homework, make costumes, recover from surgeries, and remember that we're always loved, even when nobody else said so. Jake came beside her, holding a piece of paper. "She's not just someone who helped, she's our mom." They both looked at me. I stood, slowly. My legs felt heavy and trembling all at once. Applause echoed, the kind that rises not from obligation, but from recognition. They handed me a little framed certificate with my name misspelled, the ink slightly smudged. It didn't matter. I'd never held anything more sacred. That night, back at the apartment, I finally hung a new photo on the wall. It was taken by one of the other parents during the banquet. Me in the middle, arms around Emma and Jake, all of us smiling like we didn't need permission to exist like this. Because we didn't. Not anymore. Years from now, I know the details will blur. Emma won't remember the specific books I read her before bed. Jake will forget which stuffed animal he carried to the hospital. I'll grow slower, grayer. Eventually, I may not be there for every milestone, but the imprint will remain. In the way Emma offers quiet reassurance to her friends, in the way Jake holds the door open without being asked, in the photo albums they keep when they're grown, in their voices when they say home. This is the legacy I never planned, but built anyway. One bedtime, one drawing, one court hearing, one held breath at a time,